And what becomes clear as we follow this thread deeper is that our ancestors were not simply telling stories, they were encoding observations, experiences, and warnings in a language of symbol and memory that we are only now beginning to decode. I want you to consider this carefully. When we look at the geological record, we find undeniable evidence that Earth has been shaped by sudden, powerful cosmic events, solar outbursts, magnetic shifts, impacts from space. These are not gradual changes, they are abrupt, transformational, and often they leave life scrambling to adapt. But here's where it becomes even more interesting. Ancient cultures, separated by oceans and time, all seem to describe similar events. They speak of skies that burned, of days when the sun behaved unpredictably, of seasons that no longer followed familiar patterns. And while the language differs, the emotional tone is remarkably consistent, a mix of awe, fear, and deep reverence for forces beyond human control. So I begin to ask myself, were these simply myths? Or were they memories? Because if they were memories, then what we are looking at is not primitive imagination, but a form of knowledge transfer, a way of preserving critical information across generations long before written science existed. And this is where belief enters the conversation in a powerful way. Our ancestors didn't separate the outer world from the inner world the way we often do today. For them, what happened in the cosmos was directly connected to what happened within the human body. A disturbance in the sky was also a disturbance in consciousness and emotion and biology. And modern science is beginning to echo this idea. We now know that solar activity can influence Earth's magnetic field, and that magnetic field in turn interacts with the human nervous system. Subtle changes in geomagnetic activity have been linked to shifts in mood, heart rhythm, even cognitive clarity. So when ancient traditions described people feeling disoriented, anxious, or deeply introspective during cosmic disturbances, they may have been describing a real, measurable mind-body response. Think about that. It suggests that we are not separate from these cosmic events. We are participants in them. Our bodies are not just biological machines. They are sensitive instruments, constantly responding to the environment, both seen and unseen. Every emotion we feel, every belief we hold, is part of a dynamic feedback loop between our inner world and the greater field around us. And this brings us to a deeper question. If cosmic events have the power to influence our biology, what role does our consciousness play in return? Because emerging research in fields like psychophysiology shows that our emotional states can directly affect our physical health. Stress, for example, triggers a cascade of chemical reactions that weaken the immune system. On the other hand, feelings like gratitude and coherence can enhance resilience and healing. So we are not passive. We are co-creative. And perhaps this is one of the messages our ancestors were trying to preserve, not just that cosmic events occur, but that how we respond to them matters. Imagine living in a time when the sky itself became unpredictable. No modern technology, no scientific explanations, just direct experience. In that kind of world, the ability to remain emotionally centered would not just be a psychological advantage, it could be a survival skill. Because when fear takes over, the body enters a state of chaos. Decision-making becomes impaired. The ability to adapt is reduced. But when awareness is steady, when belief is grounded, the body operates differently. It becomes more coherent, more responsive, more capable of navigating uncertainty. And this is where I see a profound bridge between ancient wisdom and modern understanding. Our ancestors may not have used the language of neuroscience or electromagnetic fields, but they understood something essential, that the state of the human heart and mind plays a critical role in how we experience and respond to change. Now let's bring this into our present moment. We are living in a time of increasing cosmic activity. Solar cycles are intensifying, magnetic fluctuations are being closely monitored. And while much of this is discussed in scientific terms, very little attention is given to the human experience of these changes. But if we look closely, we can begin to notice patterns. Moments of heightened solar activity often coincide with increased reports of restlessness, disrupted sleep, emotional sensitivity. These are subtle signals, but they point to something important, that our bodies are still deeply connected to the rhythms of the cosmos. And yet, most of us have lost the awareness of how to interpret these signals. We've been conditioned to look outside for answers, to rely solely on external systems for understanding. But the body itself is constantly communicating. It is responding, adjusting, adapting in real time. The question is, are we listening? Because if we are not aware of these connections, we may misinterpret what we are feeling. We may label it as stress, anxiety, or imbalance, without recognizing the broader context in which it is occurring. And this is where belief becomes a powerful tool. Not belief as blind acceptance, but belief is a framework through which we interpret experience. If we believe that we are separate from the universe, then cosmic events feel random, even threatening. But if we begin to see ourselves as part of a larger system, then those same events can be understood as cycles, natural processes that we are designed to move through. This shift in perspective changes everything. It moves us from fear to curiosity, from resistance to adaptation, from fragmentation to coherence. And coherence is key, because when the heart, brain, and nervous system are aligned, the body functions more efficiently. It becomes more resilient to external stressors, including those that originate beyond our immediate environment. So perhaps the real warning from our ancestors was not about the events themselves, but about our state of being in relation to those events. They may have been saying, in their own way, prepare your inner world, strengthen your awareness, cultivate emotional balance. Because when the outer world shifts, and it always does, the stability we need will not come from outside, it will come from within. And as I reflect on this, I begin to see that we are standing at a similar threshold today. The signals are different, the language has evolved, but the underlying dynamic remains the same. We are part of a living system influenced by forces, both terrestrial and cosmic, and our ability to navigate these influences depends not just on what we know, but on how we feel, how we perceive, how we choose to respond. So the question I leave you with, as we continue to explore this deeper, is not simply whether cosmic events have shaped our past, but whether we are prepared in this moment to meet them with a level of awareness that transforms not just how we survive them, but how we evolve through them. Because evolution, in its deepest sense, is not just something that happens to us, it is something that happens through us, guided by the quality of our awareness in moments of change. I've come to see that the real shift begins when we stop viewing these cosmic influences as distant abstract forces and start recognizing them as part of an ongoing dialogue between the universe and our own biology. This dialogue is subtle. It doesn't announce itself with certainty or clarity. Instead, it shows up as sensations, as changes in mood, as moments where our thoughts feel either unusually scattered or unexpectedly clear. And for most people, these experiences pass unnoticed, dismissed as random fluctuations of the mind. But what if they're not random? What if they are signals, small adjustments occurring within a much larger system that we are intimately connected to? Because when I look at the human body, I don't see something isolated. I see a field of intelligence constantly adapting, constantly recalibrating in response to both internal and external inputs. The heart responds to emotion. The brain responds to perception. And both are influenced by electromagnetic conditions that extend far beyond the limits of our skin. So when the environment changes, we change, not always in ways we can immediately measure, but often in ways we can feel if we are paying attention. And this brings us to a critical realization. Awareness is not just a passive state, it is an active process of tuning in. The more aware we become, the more sensitive we are to the subtle shifts happening within us. And this sensitivity, when understood properly, is not a weakness, it is a form of intelligence. But there is a challenge here, because increased sensitivity without understanding can easily lead to overwhelm. When we feel more, but don't know how to interpret what we're feeling, the mind tries to fill in the gaps. It creates narratives, often rooted in fear or confusion, that can amplify the very sensations we are trying to understand. This is where belief and knowledge must work together. Belief shapes the lens through which we interpret experience, while knowledge provides the context that keeps that interpretation grounded. Without knowledge, belief can drift into speculation. Without belief, knowledge can feel disconnected and lifeless. But when the two are aligned, something powerful happens. We begin to experience the world not as a series of isolated events, but as an interconnected process, one that includes us, influences us, and responds to us in return. And this is where the mind-body connection becomes more than just a concept. It becomes a practice. Because if our bodies are responding to cosmic rhythms, then how we manage our internal state becomes incredibly important. The quality of our thoughts, the stability of our emotions, the coherence of our heart rhythms, all of these factors determine how we integrate the changes occurring around us. I've noticed that during times of external intensity, the body naturally seeks balance. It looks for signals of safety, of stability, of coherence. And when those signals are present, the nervous system shifts out of survival mode and into a state where healing, clarity, and adaptation become possible. But when those signals are absent, when we are caught in cycles of stress, fear, or constant distraction, the body remains in a heightened state of alert. Over time, this drains our energy and reduces our ability to respond effectively to change. So the question becomes, how do we create those signals of coherence within ourselves? The answer is both simple and profound. It begins with attention. Where we place our attention determines what we amplify in our experience. If we focus on instability, we reinforce instability. If we focus on balance, we begin to create balance. This is not about ignoring reality, it's about choosing how we engage with it. Because every thought we think carries an emotional signature. And that emotional signature translates into biochemical signals that influence the body. Over time, these signals shape our baseline state, our default way of feeling and responding to the world. So when we intentionally cultivate states like calm awareness, gratitude, or steady focus, we are not just changing our mood, we are altering the internal environment of the body in ways that support resilience and clarity. And this is where ancient practices begin to make sense in a new light. Techniques that emphasize breath, stillness, and focused attention are not arbitrary. They are tools designed to stabilize the internal state, to create coherence in the midst of external variability. In a world influenced by cosmic rhythms, this kind of internal stability becomes a form of alignment, a way of moving with change rather than being disrupted by it. And perhaps this is what our ancestors understood at a level we are only beginning to rediscover. They may have recognized that while we cannot control the forces of the cosmos, we can influence how those forces are experienced within us. We can prepare, not by predicting every event, but by strengthening the one system we always have access to, our own consciousness. Because consciousness is not fixed. It is dynamic, responsive, capable of expanding in ways that allow us to perceive more, understand more, and adapt more effectively to the world around us. And when we begin to engage with it intentionally, something shifts. We move from reaction to participation, from being overwhelmed by change to becoming curious about it, from feeling disconnected to recognizing our place within a much larger system of interaction. But this shift does not happen all at once. It unfolds gradually through moments of awareness that build upon each other, a realization here, a subtle change in perception there. Over time, these moments begin to form a new way of relating to experience, one that is less reactive and more grounded. And as this new way of being takes shape, we may begin to notice something unexpected, a sense of calm even in uncertainty, a clarity of thought even when external conditions are fluctuating, a feeling that despite the complexity of the world around us, there is an underlying order, a rhythm that we can learn to sense and perhaps even align with. If we are willing to continue listening, refining our awareness, and exploring what it truly means to be conscious participants in a universe that is constantly in motion, constantly communicating, and perhaps in ways we are only beginning to understand, constantly inviting us to evolve just beyond the limits of who we believe we are. And as we move just beyond those limits, something subtle begins to reorganize within us, almost as if a deeper layer of intelligence is coming online, guiding us toward a more coherent way of being. I've noticed that this transition doesn't feel dramatic at first. It's quiet, almost imperceptible. But over time, it becomes undeniable. We begin to respond differently to the same external conditions. Situations that once triggered stress now evoke curiosity. Uncertainty, which once felt threatening, begins to feel like an open space, something to explore rather than avoid. And this shift is not accidental. It is the direct result of how we are learning to relate to both our inner and outer environments. Because when cosmic activity increases, the system as a whole becomes more dynamic. There is more movement, more variability, more potential for disruption, but also more potential for transformation. And the human body, incredibly, is designed for this. It is not fragile in the way we often assume. It is adaptive, intelligent, capable of recalibrating itself in response to changing conditions, as long as it is given the right internal signals. This is where the role of emotional coherence becomes essential. When the heart and brain are in sync, the body enters a state that supports optimal functioning. Communication between systems improves, energy is used more efficiently, and most importantly, our perception becomes clearer. We see more accurately. We interpret more effectively. We respond with greater precision. But coherence is not something that happens automatically in a world filled with constant stimulation. It must be cultivated. And one of the most powerful ways to cultivate it is through intentional awareness of the present moment. Not as an abstract idea, but as a lived experience. When we bring our attention fully into the present, something remarkable happens. The noise of the mind begins to settle. The body shifts out of reactive patterns, and a sense of stability emerges, not because the external world has changed, but because our relationship to it has changed. This stability acts like an anchor in times of heightened cosmic activity, when external conditions may feel unpredictable. This internal anchor allows us to remain steady. It provides a reference point, a baseline of coherence that the body can return to again and again. And over time, this becomes a new default, a way of being that is less dependent on external conditions and more rooted in internal alignment. But there's another layer to this that I find deeply compelling, because as we refine our internal state, we don't just change how we experience the world, we begin to influence the field around us in subtle ways. Every thought, every emotion generates a measurable signal. These signals extend beyond the body, interacting with the environment and with others. And while this interaction is often too subtle to notice directly, its effects can accumulate over time. This means that coherence is not just personal, it is relational. It affects how we connect with others, how we communicate, how we contribute to the collective experience. So when we choose to cultivate clarity, calm, and balanced awareness within ourselves, we are not doing so in isolation. We are participating in a larger process, one that has the potential to influence the collective response to change. And this brings us back to the idea of ancestral awareness. Perhaps the messages preserved in ancient stories were not only warnings about external events, but also reminders of our role within those events. A reminder that in times of upheaval, the most important resource is not external, it is internal. The ability to remain centered, to think clearly, to feel deeply without becoming overwhelmed, to act with intention rather than reaction. These are not just personal skills, they are evolutionary capacities. And like any capacity, they can be developed. But development requires practice. It requires a willingness to observe ourselves honestly, to recognize the patterns that pull us out of coherence, and to gently guide ourselves back again and again into a more balanced state. This is not about perfection. It's about consistency. Small, repeated shifts in awareness that gradually reshape how we experience reality. And as these shifts accumulate, something interesting begins to happen. We start to notice connections that were previously invisible. Patterns begin to emerge. We see how our internal state influences our perception, how our perception shapes our choices, and how those choices create the experiences we move through. This level of awareness brings with it a sense of empowerment, not in the sense of control, but in the sense of participation. We are no longer at the mercy of circumstances. We are engaged with them, responsive, adaptive, alive to the process of change rather than resistant to it. And in this state, even cosmic events, no matter how powerful, are experienced differently. They are not just disruptions, they are opportunities, moments where the system resets, where old patterns can dissolve, where new possibilities can emerge. But whether those possibilities are realized depends on our readiness to meet them. Because change by itself does not guarantee growth. Growth requires integration. It requires that we take the experiences we move through and allow them to inform us, to shape us, to expand our understanding of what is possible. And this is where the journey becomes deeply personal. Because no two individuals will experience this process in exactly the same way. Each of us brings a unique set of beliefs, experiences, and sensitivities to the table. And these factors influence how we interpret and respond to the shifts occurring around us. So the invitation is not to follow a single path, but to become aware of our own, to observe how we react, to notice where we feel resistance, to explore what happens when we choose a different response. And in doing so, we begin to develop a kind of inner guidance, an intuitive sense of what brings us into alignment and what pulls us away from it. This guidance is subtle, but it is reliable. It emerges from the integration of mind, body, and awareness. And when we learn to trust it, we gain access to a level of intelligence that goes beyond analytical thinking. An intelligence that is responsive to the present moment, that adapts in real time, that allows us to navigate complexity with a sense of clarity and ease. And as we continue to refine this connection, we may begin to sense that the boundary between inner and outer is not as fixed as it once seemed. That the same forces shaping the cosmos are in some way reflected within us. That the rhythms we observe in the world around us have echoes in the rhythms of our own biology, our own thoughts, our own emotions. And if that is true, then the question is no longer whether we are influenced by these cosmic cycles, but how deeply we are willing to explore the possibility that by understanding ourselves more fully, we are also learning to understand the universe, not as something separate, but as something we are intimately woven into, moment by moment, breath by breath, awareness expanding just enough to glimpse what lies beyond our perception. And as that familiar way of seeing begins to soften, we find ourselves standing at the edge of something both unknown and deeply recognizable at the same time. I've come to understand that this edge is not a boundary, it's a threshold, a place where old models of reality begin to dissolve and new ways of perceiving start to emerge. And what's fascinating is that this transition doesn't require us to acquire something new. It asks us to remember something ancient, something that has always been within us. Because beneath the noise of daily life, beneath the constant stream of thoughts and reactions, there is a quieter layer of awareness, a steady presence that observes without judgment, that responds without urgency, that remains grounded even when everything else feels uncertain. This is the aspect of consciousness that our ancestors may have relied on during times of great change, not because they had all the answers, but because they understood how to access a deeper level of stability within themselves. And in a world shaped by unpredictable cosmic forces, that stability would have been invaluable. Now, as I reflect on our current moments, I see parallels that are difficult to ignore. We are surrounded by information, yet often disconnected from direct experience. We analyze, we measure, we interpret, but we rarely pause long enough to feel what is actually happening within us. And without that connection, even the most accurate knowledge can feel incomplete. Because knowledge by itself does not create transformation, experience does, and experience is shaped not just by what happens, but by how we meet what happens. So if cosmic activity is influencing the environment in subtle ways, and our bodies are responding to those changes, then our experience of this moment is not fixed. It is fluid, it is dynamic, it is something we are actively participating in, whether we realize it or not. This realization carries both responsibility and possibility. Responsibility because it means that our internal state matters more than we may have previously believed. And possibility because it means that we have the capacity to influence how we move through periods of change. I've seen how small shifts in awareness can create significant changes in perception. A single moment of conscious breathing can interrupt a cycle of stress. A brief pause can create space between stimulus and response. A simple recognition, this is just a sensation, this is just a thought, can reduce the intensity of an experience that might otherwise feel overwhelming. These are not complex techniques. They are simple acts of awareness, but their impact is profound because each time we choose awareness over reaction, we strengthen a different pathway in the brain. We reinforce a pattern of coherence rather than chaos. And over time, these patterns become more accessible, more natural, more integrated into how we live. This is where the mind-body connection becomes a pathway for evolution. Not evolution in the traditional sense of physical change, but in the sense of expanded capacity, greater clarity, deeper resilience, a more refined ability to navigate complexity. And as this capacity grows, we begin to notice that the same external conditions no longer affect us in the same way. We are still aware of them. We still respond to them. But we are not defined by them. There is a space within us that remains steady, a center that does not fluctuate with every external shift. And from that center, we are able to engage with the world more intentionally, more creatively, more effectively. This is the kind of stability that cannot be given from the outside. It must be cultivated from within. And perhaps this is what our ancestors were pointing toward. Not just the existence of powerful cosmic cycles, but the importance of developing an inner state that can move with those cycles without losing coherence. Because when we lose coherence, we lose clarity. And when clarity is lost, our ability to respond intelligently is diminished. But when coherence is maintained, even in the face of uncertainty, something remarkable happens. We begin to see opportunities where we once saw only disruption. We recognize patterns where we once saw randomness. We feel a sense of connection where we once felt isolated. And this connection is not abstract, it is experiential. It is felt in the body, in the rhythm of the breath, in the steady awareness that remains present even as thoughts come and go. It is the recognition that we are part of a larger process, one that includes the movement of the earth, the activity of the sun, the subtle shifts in the electromagnetic environment, and the intricate responses of our own biology. All of it is connected, all of it is interacting. And we are at the center of that interaction, not as passive observers, but as active participants. So the question becomes not whether change is happening, it always is, but how we choose to meet that change. Do we resist it? Do we fear it? Or do we learn to work with it, to align with it, to use it as a catalyst for deeper awareness? Because every moment of change carries within it a kind of invitation. An invitation to let go of outdated patterns, to question assumptions that no longer serve us, to explore new ways of thinking, feeling, and being. And while this process can be uncomfortable, it is also where growth occurs. Not in the familiar, but in the unfamiliar. Not in certainty, but in exploration. And as we continue to explore, to refine our awareness, to cultivate coherence within ourselves, we may begin to sense that what once felt chaotic is actually part of a larger order, one that we are gradually learning to perceive. An order that is not imposed from the outside, but emerges from the interaction of countless systems, each responding, adapting, evolving in relation to one another, including us. And if we are willing to stay present within this process, to observe without immediately reacting, to feel without becoming overwhelmed, to think without becoming rigid, we may discover that the very forces we once feared are also the forces that can awaken something deeper within us, something that has been waiting quietly beneath the surface of our awareness, ready to emerge the moment we become still enough, aware enough, and open enough to recognize that the next stage of our evolution is not coming from somewhere out there, but is already unfolding within us. One subtle shift at a time, guiding us toward a way of being that we are only just beginning to remember, and perhaps only just beginning to trust. Trust, and as that trust begins to take root, something quietly reorganizes within the way we meet the unknown. Because trust, in this context, is not blind belief. It is a felt sense of stability that emerges when we repeatedly experience ourselves moving through uncertainty without losing our center. It's built through direct observation, through noticing that even when external conditions shift, there is still a part of us that remains steady, aware, and capable of responding. And the more we recognize that part of ourselves, the more accessible it becomes. I've found that this accessibility changes everything. It changes how we interpret sensation. What once felt like unease may begin to feel like activation. What once felt like confusion may begin to feel like expansion. The raw data of experience doesn't necessarily change, but the meaning we assign to it does. And meaning is powerful, because meaning shapes biology. Every interpretation we make sends signals through the nervous system. It influences hormone production, immune response, and even the way our brain organizes information. So when we shift the meaning of an experience from threat to transformation, we are not just thinking differently, we are literally functioning differently. This is where the bridge between consciousness and physiology becomes undeniable. The body listens to the mind, and the mind in turn is constantly influenced by the state of the body. It's a continuous loop, a dynamic exchange. And within that exchange lies the potential for either coherence or chaos. So when cosmic conditions introduce variability into the system, when electromagnetic fluctuations subtly influence our internal rhythms, the stability of this loop becomes even more important, because without awareness, the loop can spiral. A small sensation becomes a concerning thought. That thought generates an emotional response. The emotion amplifies the sensation, and before we know it, we are caught in a cycle that feels larger than it actually is. But with awareness, something different happens. We notice the sensation without immediately labeling it. We observe the thought without attaching to it. We allow the emotion to move without resisting it. And in doing so, we interrupt the cycle. We create space. And in that space, coherence has a chance to emerge. This is not about controlling experience. It's about relating to it differently. Because control often comes from fear, the desire to eliminate uncertainty. But relationship comes from understanding, the willingness to engage with uncertainty in a conscious way. And when we shift from control to relationship, we open ourselves to a deeper level of intelligence. An intelligence that does not rely solely on analysis, but includes intuition, sensation, and awareness as equally valid forms of information. This kind of intelligence is adaptive. It responds in real time. It integrates multiple layers of input simultaneously. And perhaps most importantly, it allows us to remain flexible in the face of change. Flexibility is essential, because the more rigid we are, physically, mentally, emotionally, the more likely we are to experience disruption when conditions shift. But when we are flexible, when we can adjust and adapt, those same shifts become easier to navigate. They may still challenge us, they may still require effort, but they do not overwhelm us in the same way. And this brings me back to something I often reflect on. Our ancestors lived in direct relationship with the environment. They observed patterns over long periods of time. They learned to read subtle signals, changes in the sky and the land and their own bodies. And while their interpretations were expressed differently than ours, the underlying skill was the same: awareness, a refined sensitivity to change, a willingness to listen, and perhaps most importantly, a respect for the interconnected nature of all systems. We are rediscovering that interconnectedness now, but through a different lens. Science is giving us the language to describe what was once only felt. We can measure electromagnetic fields. We can track solar activity. We can observe how these factors influence biological systems. But measurement alone is not enough, because data does not replace experience. It informs it. It gives us context. But the actual process of integration still happens within us through awareness, through perception, through the choices we make in response to what we feel. So the real question is not just what is happening out there, but how we are integrating what is happening within here. Because integration is where transformation occurs. It's where information becomes understanding, where understanding becomes action, and where action, repeated over time, becomes a new way of being. This is not a one-time event. It's an ongoing process, a continuous refinement of how we relate to ourselves and the world around us. And as we move through this process, something subtle but profound begins to emerge, a sense of alignment, not as a rigid state, but as a dynamic balance, one that adjusts as conditions change yet remains centered. This alignment is not about perfection. It's about responsiveness, the ability to meet each moment as it is without needing it to be different. And in that meeting, there is a kind of clarity that arises, a clarity that is not forced but revealed. It shows us what matters, what requires attention, what can be released. And over time, this clarity simplifies the way we move through life. We become less reactive, less entangled in unnecessary complexity, more attuned to what is actually happening rather than what we fear might happen. And this attunement creates a kind of internal guidance system, a steady reference point that we can return to even when everything else feels uncertain. It doesn't eliminate challenge, but it changes how we experience challenge. It transforms it from something that happens to us into something we engage with. And in that engagement, we begin to recognize a deeper pattern that every shift, every disruption, every moment of uncertainty carries within it the potential for insight. Not always immediately, not always comfortably, but consistently if we are willing to stay present long enough to see it. And this willingness to remain present, to continue observing, to keep refining our awareness, is what allows the process to unfold. It is what turns experience into evolution, not through force, but through participation, through a quiet, steady commitment to understanding ourselves more deeply with each passing moment. And as that understanding grows, we may begin to sense that what once felt like isolated experiences are actually part of a much larger movement, one that is guiding us gently but persistently toward a more integrated way of being, where the boundaries between inner and outer, between self and environment, between what we think we are and what we are becoming, begin to blur just enough for us to glimpse a deeper continuity, one that has always been present, quietly shaping our journey, waiting for us to notice that the change we've been observing in the world around us is also unfolding within us in ways that are far more intimate, far more immediate, and far more transformative than we may have ever imagined. And as that realization settles in, we begin to sense that what we once called external change is not separate from us at all. It is mirrored within our own patterns of thought, emotion, and perception. I've found that this mirroring is one of the most important insights we can cultivate. Because when we recognize that the turbulence we observe outside can echo within, we stop treating our internal experience as random or disconnected. Instead, we begin to approach it with curiosity, with a kind of quiet investigation. What am I feeling right now? Where is this sensation in my body? What thought is connected to it? And perhaps most importantly, is this reaction necessary? Or is it simply familiar? These questions are simple, but they open the door to a deeper level of awareness. They interrupt automatic patterns. They create a pause. And in that pause, something new becomes possible. Because most of our responses are not conscious choices. They are conditioned reactions, patterns that have been reinforced over time, often without our awareness. And when conditions intensify, whether through personal stress or broader environmental shifts, these patterns tend to surface more strongly. Not because something is wrong, but because the system is being activated. And activation, when understood, is an opportunity. It shows us what is unresolved, what is habitual, what is ready to be seen more clearly. So rather than resisting these moments, I've learned to observe them, to treat them as signals rather than problems. Because every signal carries information. And when we begin to decode that information, we gain insight into how our internal system operates. This is where the idea of self-regulation becomes incredibly important. Self-regulation is not suppression. It's not about pushing feelings away or forcing ourselves to remain calm. It's about creating enough space within our awareness to allow experience to move without overwhelming us. It's the ability to feel fully without losing clarity, to think clearly without disconnecting from the body, to remain present even when the moment is intense. And like any skill, it develops over time, through practice, through repetition, through a willingness to stay engaged with our own experience, even when it would be easier to distract ourselves. Because distraction is often our default response. When something feels uncomfortable, we look away, we seek stimulation, we try to override the experience rather than understand it. But in doing so, we miss the opportunity to learn from it. We miss the chance to build the very capacity that would allow us to navigate future challenges with greater ease. And this brings us back to the larger context. If cosmic activity is increasing variability in the system, if our bodies are responding to these shifts in subtle but real ways, then our ability to self-regulate becomes more than just a personal benefit. It becomes essential, because without it, we are more likely to be carried by the waves of change rather than moving with them. And there is a difference. Being carried implies a lack of direction, a sense of being overwhelmed by forces beyond our control. But moving with implies participation. It implies awareness, responsiveness, adaptability. It suggests that while we may not control the waves, we can learn how to navigate them. And navigation requires presence. It requires that we stay connected to what is happening both within us and around us without becoming lost in either. This balance is subtle. Too much focus on the external, and we lose touch with our internal state. Too much focus on the internal, and we lose context for what is happening in the environment. But when the two are integrated, something powerful emerges. A kind of grounded awareness that allows us to move through complexity with a sense of orientation. We know where we are. We know what we feel. We know how to respond. And this knowing is not rigid. It adapts. It evolves. It refines itself with each new experience. This is what I see as the essence of conscious evolution. Not a sudden leap, but a gradual refinement of how we perceive and engage with reality. A process that unfolds moment by moment, shaped by the choices we make in response to what we encounter. And as we continue along this path, something begins to shift in how we relate to uncertainty. It becomes less of a threat and more of a space where new possibilities can emerge, where old assumptions can be questioned, where new patterns can take form. This doesn't mean uncertainty becomes comfortable, but it becomes workable. It becomes something we can engage with rather than avoid. And in that engagement, we begin to discover a deeper layer of resilience. Not the kind that resists change, but the kind that adapts to it, that learns from it, that grows through it. And this resilience is not built overnight. It is cultivated through consistent attention to our internal state, through the repeated practice of returning to awareness, through the gradual strengthening of our capacity to remain present even when conditions are less than ideal. And as this capacity grows, we may begin to notice something subtle but profound, a shift in identity. We begin to see ourselves not just as individuals reacting to the world, but as participants within a larger system of interaction. We recognize that our thoughts, our emotions, our choices, all of these contribute to the patterns we experience. And with that recognition comes a new level of responsibility, not in a burdensome way, but in an empowering one, because it means that change is not something we have to wait for. It is something we can engage with, influence, and integrate in real time. And this is where the teachings of the past and the discoveries of the present begin to converge. Both point toward the same essential truth, that the state of our inner world shapes how we experience the outer world. That awareness is the key to navigating change, and that within each of us is the capacity to develop a level of coherence that allows us to move through even the most uncertain conditions with clarity and intention. So as we continue to explore this unfolding relationship between cosmic activity and human consciousness, I invite you to remain curious, to observe your own experience, to notice the subtle ways in which your body responds, your thoughts shift, your emotions move, because within those subtle shifts lies a deeper story, a story of adaptation, of awareness, of evolution, in progress. And perhaps as we continue to follow this thread, we may begin to uncover something even more profound, that the warnings we once believed were about surviving external events were in many ways guiding us toward a deeper understanding of ourselves, an understanding that is still unfolding, still revealing new layers, and still inviting us to explore what it truly means to be conscious, connected, and fully engaged with a universe that is not just happening around us, but in ways we are only beginning to sense happening through us.
Let's take a step deeper into what we've been exploring and gently unpack it in a way that connects both understanding and lived experience. At the heart of this entire discussion is a simple but powerful idea. We are not separate from the environment. We are in constant relationship with it. And that environment doesn't just include the ground beneath our feet or the air we breathe. It also includes subtle forces like electromagnetic activity, solar cycles, and cosmic rhythms that quietly shape the conditions in which we live. Now, that might sound abstract at first, so let's bring it into something more relatable. Think about how you feel on different days. Some days, you wake up clear, focused, emotionally steady. Other days, without any obvious reason, your mind feels scattered, your mood shifts quickly, or your energy feels low. Most people assume these changes are random or purely psychological. But what if part of what you're experiencing is your body responding to changes in the larger environment? Modern science has shown that the Earth has a magnetic field, and that this field fluctuates, especially during periods of increased solar activity. Now, here's the important part. Your body also operates through electrical and magnetic signals. Your heart, your brain, your nervous system, they all depend on these signals to function. So when the environment changes, even subtly, your body notices. You may not consciously think the magnetic field is fluctuating today, but your system is still responding. And that response can show up as changes in mood, focus, sleep, or emotional sensitivity. This is where the mind-body connection becomes incredibly important. Because your body is constantly receiving information and your mind is constantly interpreting it. Imagine your body sends a signal, maybe a slight tension, restlessness, or fatigue. Now your mind steps in and tries to explain it. If your default interpretation is stress or worry, you might think something is wrong with me. That thought creates more tension, which amplifies the original sensation. But if your interpretation is different, if you think this is just my body adjusting to something, the response changes. You remain calmer, the body stabilizes more quickly. Same sensation, different meaning, completely different outcome. This is why belief is not just philosophical, it's biological. Your beliefs shape how you interpret experience, and that interpretation directly affects your physiology. Let's make this even simpler. Think of your mind as a storyteller and your body as a responder. The body sends signals. The mind creates a story about those signals, and the story determines how the body reacts next. If the story is fear-based, the body enters stress mode. If the story is grounded and aware, the body remains more balanced. This loop is happening all the time. Now, here's where your power comes in. You may not always control the initial signal, but you can influence the story. And by changing the story, you change the entire loop. This is the foundation of self-regulation. Self-regulation doesn't mean suppressing what you feel. It means staying present with it without immediately reacting. It means creating a small gap between sensation and interpretation. And in that gap, you have choice. So how do we actually practice this in daily life? Let's make it practical. The first step is awareness of sensation. At different points in your day, pause and ask yourself, what am I feeling in my body right now? Not emotionally, but physically. Is there tension, lightness, restlessness? You're not trying to change it. Just notice it. The second step is neutral observation. Instead of labeling the sensation as good or bad, simply acknowledge it. For example, there's a tightness in my chest, or my thoughts feel fast right now. This reduces the tendency to react automatically. The third step is conscious breathing. Slow, steady breathing is one of the most direct ways to signal safety to your nervous system. Try inhaling slowly for a few seconds, then exhaling even more slowly. This simple act begins to restore balance between the heart and brain. The fourth step is intentional meaning. Once you've created a bit of space, gently shift your interpretation. Instead of something is wrong, try my system is adjusting or this is temporary. You're not forcing positivity, you're choosing a perspective that supports stability. And over time, this practice begins to rewire your default responses. Now, let's connect this back to the larger idea of cosmic influence. If the environment becomes more dynamic, if there are more fluctuations, then your internal stability becomes even more important. Think of it like being on a boat. If the water is calm, almost anyone can stay balanced. But if the waves increase, your ability to stay centered becomes essential. Your awareness is your balance. Your breath is your stabilizer. Your interpretation is your direction. And when these are aligned, you can move through even intense conditions with clarity. This is what we mean by coherence. Coherence is when your thoughts, emotions, and physical state are working together rather than against each other. It's not about being perfectly calm all the time. It's about being integrated, responding as a whole system. And here's something important to understand. Coherence doesn't just affect you, it affects how you interact with others. When you are grounded, your communication changes, your presence becomes steadier. People around you may feel more at ease, even if they can't explain why. This is because human systems are interconnected. We influence each other constantly, often below the level of conscious awareness. So your internal work has a ripple effect. Now let's go one layer deeper. All of this, awareness, regulation, coherence, is not just about managing stress. It's about expanding consciousness. Because as you become more aware of your internal processes, you begin to see patterns. You notice how certain thoughts trigger certain emotions, how certain beliefs shape your reactions. And once you see a pattern clearly, you are no longer controlled by it in the same way. You have space. You have choice. This is where transformation begins, not in dramatic moments, but in small, consistent shifts. Choosing to pause instead of react. Choosing to observe instead of judge. Choosing to stay present instead of escape. These choices may seem simple, but over time, they fundamentally change how you experience reality. And as your experience changes, your relationship with the world changes. Uncertainty becomes less threatening. Change becomes more navigable. And even large, complex influences like cosmic activity become something you can move with rather than something that overwhelms you. So if you take anything from this, let it be this. You are part of a dynamic system, constantly interacting with forces, both seen and unseen. Your body is intelligent. Your awareness is a tool, and your interpretation shapes your experience more than the event itself. The more you practice staying present, observing clearly, and responding intentionally, the more you begin to realize that what once felt like chaos is actually an invitation to develop a deeper level of stability, clarity, and connection within yourself, one moment of awareness at a time,